Oke, selamat siang, sore teman-teman semua, dimanapun berada. Terima kasih. Mungkin pertama-tama saya perkenalkan diri dulu. Selamat siang semua teman-teman. Selamat bergabung di webinar kali ini. Nama saya Irna, atau nama panjangnya adalah Irham Putri Rahmawati. Di sini saya representatif dari Wildlife Rescue Centre Jogja, Yayasan Konservasi Alam, yang merupakan pusat penyelamatan satwa yang berada di Jogja. Nah, acara pada siang hari ini kita sebenarnya menginisiasi bersama ya, tidak hanya dari WRC Jogja aja, tapi juga bersama dengan Wildlife Conservation Forum atau WCF yang di sini akan direpresentasikan oleh Mas Agus. Nanti kita akan kenalan juga dengan Mas Agus. Jadi tujuan siang hari ini adalah untuk belajar sebanyak-banyaknya ya mengenai in-situ dan ex-situ link itu seperti apa. Tapi sebelum kita memulai lebih jauh, mungkin saya invite Mas Agus dulu kali untuk join. Ya, monggo Mas Agus, silahkan bergabung bersama kita.
Hai Irna.
Ya, monggo Mas, perkenalan dulu mungkin. Tadi dari saya sudah perkenalkan diri dan juga sedikit tentang WRC Jogja. Gitu.
Kalau untuk WCF Jogja sendiri, namanya Wildlife Conservation Forum Jogja ya. Jadi ini bukan suatu organisasi atau institusi, tapi ini merupakan forum. Jadi paguyuban dari orang-orang atau organisasi-organisasi di Jogja yang punya ketertarikan dengan bidang konservasi. Jadi anggotanya terdiri dari mahasiswa, dosen-dosen, kemudian NGO-NGO yang ada di Jogja, dan individu-individu yang tertarik dengan bidang konservasi.
Jadi mungkin kita spill dikit nih, sebenarnya topik webinar kita ini tentang apa gitu ya, sebelum nanti lebih lanjut kita ketemu narasumber. Jadi kalau boleh sedikit bercerita ya, sebenarnya tentang apa webinar ini, kenapa kita sebut ex-situ dan in-situ link di sini. Karena sebenarnya kita menganggap konservasi ini bukan langkah yang bisa dilakukan oleh sendiri ya. Jadi dari segala macam upaya konservasi mungkin yang sudah teman-teman banyak tahu juga, itu bisa dilakukan di habitatnya, di tempat asal satwa ataupun spesies itu berada. Tapi upaya konservasi juga harus dilakukan gitu di luar habitatnya, karena bukan tidak mungkin ya sesuatu itu ancaman itu ada juga di habitat in situ yang tidak memungkinkan lagi untuk upaya penyelamatan itu dilakukan di habitat gitu. Nah, sebenarnya ngomongin in situ ex situ ini itu sudah diinisiasi ya oleh Waza waktu itu. Bisa sama sharing dan sama-sama dikoreksi ya dari yang saya tahu, dari organisasi oleh World Zoo Association atau WAZA di tahun 2005 kalau nggak salah. Jadi memang sebuah pendekatan yang menggunakan konsep bahwa konservasi itu adalah upaya kolektif gitu antara in situ dan ex situ. Sehingga dari sudut pandang pendekatan itu lebih dikenal dengan pendekatan satu atau one plan approach ya, satu rencana. Jadi memang one plan approach ini sebuah konsepnya, sedangkan one plan approach ini mencakupi hubungan antara upaya konservasi ex situ dan upaya konservasi in situ. Sudah banyak sebenarnya lembaga atau organisasi yang mengaplikasikan pendekatan ini ya ke upaya-upaya konservasi yang mereka lakukan. Pada intinya, di one plan approach ini sangat upholding atau sangat menjunjung tinggi upaya mengelola konservasi ini bersama-sama gitu antara lembaga yang fokus di in situ atau di habitatnya dan juga lembaga yang ex-situ atau yang berada di luar habitatnya. Nah, mungkin hari ini kita akan belajar dari narasumber kita apa saja sih contoh-contoh upaya one plant approach atau in-situ dan ex-situ link ini yang dilakukan oleh teman-teman dari PCBA. Mungkin Mas Agus sebelum kita mulai lanjut ada tambahan dulu?
Jadi ternyata konservasi ex-situ in-situ link atau integrasi konservasi ex-situ in-situ ini juga bisa disebut juga dengan one plant approach ya ternyata ya.
Jadi kayak One Health kali ya, kalau yang lagi nge-hits itu kan sekarang kan One Health ya. Pada intinya sama ya, upaya kolaborasi lah semua stakeholder untuk mencapai tujuan yang sama.
Cocok sekali ini hari ini karena kita punya narasumber yang berasal dari institusi yang sudah menerapkan itu. Narasumber kita kali ini adalah Jochen Menner dari Prigen Conservation Breeding Ark di Taman Safari 2 Jatim. Hari ini Jochen bergabung dengan kita langsung dari Prigen, Jawa Timur. Jochen, halo, apa kabar?
Baik, baik. Terima kasih. Hi, thanks for having me. I'll speak in English. I hope that's fine for everyone. It is easier for me to deliver messages in English later. Once we have Q&A, we can switch back to Bahasa Indonesia, and I'll do my best to answer in Indonesian. But for the presentation about PCBA itself, I would like to stick to English.
I guess
I think that's okay.
That's completely okay for us. So, Jochen, before we start, tell us a little bit about you. Where are you from, and how long you have been here in Indonesia?
So, my name is Jochen. I'm from Germany, so English is also my second language. So, in case there's shortcomings, that's because I'm actually German. I live and work in Indonesia for a bit more than 4 years now. Most of the time here in Prigen, in Taman Safari 2 Jatim. My background is animal keeper. I'm trained animal care professional. I've worked in German zoos and bird parks. More than 10 years ago, I worked in Vietnam with primates. My focus has always been on conservation, ex-situ conservation. I'm a zoo person, so my expertise is in ex-situ work. But obviously, if you work in Indonesia, which is the range country for all the species we work with, you immediately start thinking about one plan approach, the link between ex-situ and in-situ work. So here at Taman Safari 2 and Prigen Conservation Breeding Ark, we are more and more focusing on this link between ex-situ and in-situ.
PCBA, mungkin teman-teman sudah pernah dengar apa itu Prigen Conservation Breeding Ark, cuman mungkin belum benar-benar tahu detail sebenarnya apa sih yang dilakukan PCBA ini. Jadi saya juga excited sekali sebenarnya untuk belajar tentang PCBA ini karena saya dulu juga bekerja di Taman Safari 2 Jatim. Cuman waktu saya di sana dulu belum ada PCBA ini. Jadi ini kesempatan saya juga untuk belajar apa aja sih yang sudah dilakukan di PCBA. Okay, Jochen, you have about 30 to 50 minutes to talk. And then we will have Q&A session for the rest of the webinar. So, Jochen, we are ready to listen.
Good, I'll do my best to share my screen. Can you see my screen, the presentation? Cool.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, this presentation will focus more on the work we do here in Taman Safari 2 at Prigen Conservation Breeding Ark, rather than the whole concept of one plan approach. Later in the discussion, we can focus more on the bigger concept behind all this conservation work. For now, I want to give an introduction to our facility here at Taman Safari. First of all, you have to understand that Asian songbirds and Indonesian songbirds in particular are in a crisis. This is because they are poached for the pet trade. In 2015, there was a big Asian songbird crisis summit in Singapore, and it was determined that there's an urgent need to focus more on ex-situ conservation for some of the most threatened songbird species in Asia, but particularly in Indonesia. Taman Safari stepped up and committed to provide facilities to breed songbird species. Previously in Bogor, but later on in Prigen as well. In 2017, Prigen Conservation Breeding Ark was established here at Taman Safari 2. And that's what I want to introduce you to today. So, many of you will know where Taman Safari 2 Jatim actually is located, halfway between Surabaya and Malang, on the slopes of Gunung Arjuna. Super cool location, about 700 meters high, so perfect for all sorts of species, not only for the lowland species, but also for highland species. Perfect climate. Even Germans fare pretty well at that climate. This is a pretty recent drone footage of PCBA, and you can see we have grown substantially. This complex here was the first complex to be built in 2017. That's how it all started. Nowadays, you can see we have quite a lot more. All these complexes around here are exclusively dedicated to the conservation breeding of songbirds. So are these, others are for parrots, galliforms, mammals. So we have quite a variety of animals. Of course, to take care of that many animals, you need keepers. We have a very dedicated animal care staff. We have 13 keepers, 13 Indonesian keepers. We have me as a curator. We have a head keeper from Germany. We have 2 gardeners and 2 biologists to take care of all these animals, and more focus on in-situ work as well. So we started in 2017 and the focus was on songbirds. Clearly something needed to be done. Songbirds were in grave danger. You can see the Javan-pied starling here. In 2017, it was already pretty clear that the species is doomed in the wild. So we need to do something ex-situ, urgently. That's what PCBA was founded for. Pretty early on, the Javan warty pig was included into the project, because even though many people don't really think about pigs as worth of conservation or in need of conservation, still the Javan warty pig, which is endemic to Java, means it only occurs on Java and nowhere else, is in serious danger. This is due to habitat loss, due to hunting, and also due to hybridization with the babi hutan, the bandit pig. So Taman Safari 2 are committed to conservation breeding for these pigs. Same thing for the Javan palm civet, Musang akar Java. It was overlooked for many, many years. Actually, it was lost to science for more than 50 years until it was rediscovered. And when it was rediscovered, of course, it was also rediscovered in the pet trade. So now this Javan endemic is under serious pressure. In 2021, we were able to set up the first facility for parrots, which obviously is the same thing like songbirds, highly threatened. So for songbirds, let's start here. Currently, we take care of 28 taxa. Why am I saying taxa, not species? Because for some of our birds, it's not quite clear whether they are actually species or subspecies or just local varieties. This is for some, the science is not yet there. We don't really know. That's why it's safer to say taxa. At PCBA, currently we keep roughly 350 individuals of songbirds, which is quite a lot. So you need a lot of space. 215 aviaries are spread over 8 complexes. And as you can see here, these aviaries are quite large. These are not traditional songbird cages. Actually, Most of our aviaries are 4 meter long, 2 meter wide, 3 meter high. They're very heavily planted, as you can see in the picture, to provide the birds with an environment that they can feel safe in, that they feel at home, so that they actually start breeding. Because many of these songbird species that we work with are very, very sensitive. That is why there's not many zoos are working with these species, because it takes a lot of dedication, it takes a lot of care to actually be successful with many of the small passerine species. You can see a holding facility. This is much more open. In the upper picture, you can see solid walls dividing the aviaries to provide shelter, security for the birds. In this lower picture, you can see that the walls are all made of casa, or made of wire mesh. This is to allow socialization between the birds, because this building here we actually use for offspring. So that means if you have a lot of breeding pairs, of course you also need space for the offspring to house them adequately. Here you can see large aviary rows. All of these aviaries are completely covered by roof. This is necessary because we are working with a lot of very sensitive lowland species, which we want to protect from heavy rain or heavy wind, and to keep them safe, especially during the rainy season when it can get pretty chilly up here. We want to keep them safe. That's why it's completely covered in roof. So this is one of the species we are working with. I hope many of you have at least heard of it. This is the Wangi-Wangi white-eye. The Wangi-Wangi white-eye was not described until October last year, when it finally received its scientific name, Zosterops paru besar. So the scientific name obviously is derived from Indonesian, from the large beak, paru besar, or paru kuning. But there was a debate if it's really kuning or jingga, so better besar, it is clearly big. This is a species that is endemic to Pulau Wangi-Wangi in Kepulauan Wakatobi, Sulawesi Selatan, and it is under grave danger by habitat destruction and also poaching. Here at Taman Safari, we keep the only ex-situ colony of these birds, and we have successfully raised them many times by now. Here you can see an incubating bird in the nest, which was built here in our aviaries. So they reproduce successfully here, but it is a very sensitive species and socially very challenging. Not like other white-eyes that you can keep in a flock. No, much rather, they're very aggressive. So it is very difficult to make new pairs, and even pairs that live together harmoniously for a long time can occasionally fight. It makes it difficult to manage. Nevertheless, we are pretty successful with them. This here is the Maratua shama, endemic to Maratua Island in Kalimantan Timur. It is restricted to this tiny island. It has been poached for many years, and it was feared extinct in 2015 when Berner visited the island and didn't record it, even though he was trying to. And that's never a good sign if you don't record a shama, because as we all know, I'm sure, shamas sing beautifully. That's why we love to keep them. So if you don't record a shama in the wild, even though you use playback, then maybe there is no shama. So for quite some years, we actually feared that the Maratua shama might be extinct in the wild and might only survive at PCBA. Because the thing is, we don't know of anyone else that breeds pure Maratua shamas anywhere in Indonesia, and certainly not outside of the country. So currently, here at PCBA, we keep 48 individuals. Nearly all of them have hatched here. This is the biggest population that we know of. About the status in the wild, I'll tell you a little bit more later. Oops, wrong direction. This one here is clearly a beo. Huh? We all know that this is a hill miner. But this beo in particular is Beo Tenggara, the Tenggara hill miner. You can see it has a white iris, which marks it as a female. Particularly, this species shows this sexual dimorphism. Also, the yellow wattles in the back of the head are far more extended upwards than they are in other Beo species. Clearly distinguishable from other species, and it is a distinct species actually, not a subspecies. Nevertheless, nobody really cared about the demise in the wild. We do have some survey reports. The survey is focused on cockatoos. That says, yeah, basically the Beo is gone from wherever it used to be. And that's not a good sign, obviously. In the trade, they do show up, but not very rare, not very commonly. So we don't really know what's going on in the wild. And there's no other ex-situ institution working with this species currently. So you can already catch a pattern. Here at Taman Safari 2, at PCBA, at this breeding facility behind the scenes, we focus on these species that are commonly overlooked. Many of these species don't really receive a lot of conservation attention. This might be due to lack of interest, lack of knowledge, or the species is simply not charismatic enough to actually focus on it. Beos, yeah, there's many beos in zoos, in LK around the world, but Beo Tenggara not, because nobody really knows about it. So that's what we are doing here. Perfect example, the Javan warty pig. You can see in the upper picture, we have a large enclosure complex, 5 large outdoor enclosures, 10 indoor holdings to be able to accommodate a large group of pigs. Currently, we have 18 individuals split up in 4 parties, and we are breeding them very successfully, obviously. Here you can see why they're actually called Javan warty pig, babi terjelek di dunia, which I don't agree with. In my opinion, they look very charismatic, but definitely, yeah, unique. Huh? So they have these wartles, this warties, these cutils in the face, and this very long tusks in the male. Very unique species. Nevertheless, often overlooked. Nobody really cares about the conservation of pigs. Here at PCBA, we have bred them successfully several times, and we have also contributed to a release program. We have contributed pigs to Baluran National Park. This was a joint project by Cikananga in Sukabumi, by Taman Safari Bogor and Taman Safari 2 in Jatim. And we all sent pigs to Baluran for a reintroduction project. The Javan palm civet, Musang akar Jawa, another one of these species nobody really thinks about. Wow, they're so cute, huh? You can totally see why people would want to keep them as pets. They're quite easily tameable. They don't really bite or anything. They don't even smell like other musang. So you can understand why people would like to keep them as pets. But the problem is, so many of these musang are not captive bred, they're taken from the wild. So obviously the wild populations are dwindling rapidly and they're in actual danger of going extinct. So we started working with this species here at Taman Safari. We set up 8 enclosures previously. We started breeding. We were very successfully straight from the beginning on. And now we just build another enclosure complex. Because always the aim is, what we want to do here is to set up stable ex-situ populations. It doesn't help if we have 2 pairs and we produce some anakan and then it all slowly fades out because we don't have a long-term plan. The aim at PCBA, at this breeding facility behind the scenes, we don't have any visitors. So the pure aim is to create stable ex-situ populations. So we just now added another enclosure complex to be able to accommodate more of these animals, because it is very hard to find partners that will work along. Who really wants to commit time, money, energy, space to breed some musang? Nobody really wants. So to preserve the species, we need to provide the space here in Prigen. Parrots. I mean, many of you will know how parrots in Indonesia are being traded and also being confiscated, luckily. The authorities do a lot to confiscate illegally kept and traded parrots, and that's why it became pretty obvious that we need to add facilities for parrots, because there's so many that urgently need adequate housing. These confiscated individuals, especially of the most threatened species, urgently need space to be able to reproduce. If they cannot be returned to the wild, they at least need to reproduce ex situ. So for example, here in the picture, you have a Kakatua sulphurea, in this case occidentalis from Nusa Tenggara. This species is critically endangered now. There's very few left. So all those that are actually here in our care need to reproduce. That's why we built this enclosure complexes, aviary complex, to be able to accommodate these individuals. The Nurita laut, the red and blue lorry, those of course also originate from a confiscation in Tanjung Perak and received a chance to breed here at Taman Safari. Galliforms, yeah, many Indonesian galliforms are local endemics, are often overlooked. In the picture here, you can see Puyuh gonggong jatim, or muka putih. This is our local endemic species. It is completely restricted to Jawa Timur. It doesn't occur anywhere else in the world. And it is traded in large numbers, really, really many. So we have to ask ourselves, how long is it really sustainable for this species in the wild? So it is urgently needed to start ex-situ capacities as soon as possible, as long as there are still birds left. Because once the species is extinct in the wild and you don't have enough individuals in captivity, then it's gone. So we started with this project here, and we have 16 very nice aviaries. They're all well planted, well designed, so you can see that these birds raise their chicks by themselves, which is always what you want to achieve. And especially in galliforms, in this partridges, for example, it is not so easy to get the parents to incubate their eggs by themselves, to raise the chicks. So we have designed an aviary complex that is specifically made to allow the birds to do their job by themselves. Small mammals. What is small mammals? Earlier we talked about the musang akar Jawa, which is a carnivorous species. Recently we added another enclosure complex to accommodate species that are not non-carnivorous, to be able to keep them away from each other. Because many species, prey species, they suffer stress if there's a carnivore around. So it is not very wise to keep a non-carnivorous species together with a carnivorous species in one aviary complex. That will cause stress. So for species like this kukang Jawa, which is a critically endangered species, we decided to build a new aviary complex specifically to accommodate these species, very sensitive, non-carnivorous species. You can see here a pangolin and a Javan slow loris. Both of these species are critically endangered, and they don't have stable ex-situ populations so far. There's a lot of kukang being confiscated, and many are re-released. Some remain in Lembaga Konservasi, but often there's not enough facility to actually accommodate a whole lot of these individuals, a whole lot of kukang, for example. Of course, many zoos can provide facility for kukang, but for how many? And then often there's no real space to actually breed them. So that's what we want to do here. We want to provide facilities behind the scenes, very quiet, only focusing on the animal, to actually be able to breed these critically endangered species. And then, of course, you have to ask yourself, where is all that going? If we breed all these species here, what is the aim? Now we have 400 birds. Soon we will have 600, and then 800, and then 1,000, and then why? Obviously, the aim is to reintroduce wherever we can. As many species as possible we want to reintroduce. just last November, on the 5th of November, we were able to release 40 individuals of Jalaksuren java, the Javan pied starling. This is a species that we commonly know from the Pasar Borong. It is bred in large numbers in commercial breeding facilities. But in fact, the species is critically endangered and most likely extinct in the wild. It was once endemic to southern Sumatra, Java, and Bali. On Bali, it's gone. Southern Sumatra, certainly gone. In Java, yeah, most likely it's also gone. There might be some population, some individuals left somewhere in the wild, but there's nothing really known. There's no viable population left in the wild. So all the individuals that we see in the market are captive bred. And that can be a good thing because at least they survive in captivity. That's basically what we're doing here as well. But the big difference between commercial penangkaran and Taman Safari or other LK, Lembaga Konservasi, is that we are focusing on the purebred, mutation-free Javan pied starling. So in many of the commercial facilities, the breeder actually selects towards color mutations, albino or pied or cremino, lutino, all these mutations that occur if you breed animals in large numbers. This is what breeders enhance because of course it's more interesting and it commences higher prices. So what we do here is the opposite. We focus exclusively on wild type, phenotypically wild Javan pied starlings. And at the same time, of course, we only have pure birds. There's no hybrids with mainland pied starlings, for example. We have started breeding the Javan pied starling right in 2017. And over the years, until November last year, the population increased up to nearly 70 individuals. So we were able to release 40 individuals here onto the grounds of Taman Safari. Taman Safari is the perfect location to do this release because it is 360 hectares of well-protected habitat. We have 24/7 security, we have a fence around, we have vast areas of short grass, as you can see in the pictures, which is kept open by herbivores, by antelopes, giraffes, zebras, all that kind of animals. They keep the grass short and they produce a lot of feces. As you can see in the middle, in the picture in the middle, these feces not only attract the starlings, but more so they attract insects. And these insects attract the starlings because they provide food. So that's why Taman Safari was the perfect location to do this trial release. Now, after exactly 2 months after the release, we can say that so far it is very successful. Of the 40 starlings that we released, 34 are still here. We only found one dead bird, and we have 5 that we don't really know of what happened. They basically disappeared. But the other 34 are still around, which is amazing after 2 months. The starlings are doing very well. They're singing as they should do. They're finding their own food. And this is the biggest news, basically, they start building their own nests in the wild. So that is what we aim for. Here in the picture, you can see a starling collecting nesting material. These photos are all taken by our biologist, Puku, who is doing an amazing job, monitoring them every day, taking photographic records of every bird that he encounters every day to be able to properly count them, monitors their behavior, collects all the data in order to learn and later share this information with others who might attempt a reintroduction as well. In the photo here, you can see this bird is clearly tagged. It has a number tag and it has color tags. So each bird is individually tagged so that we can actually monitor them individually. And again, so far, these birds are doing very, very well out there. What else do we do in situ? Taman Safari has an MOU with Balai Taman Nasional Wakatobi. This was signed last year. and it manifests the cooperation between these two institutions, Taman Safari and Yayasan Kasi, and the Balai Taman Nasional Wakatobi, in order to protect native endemic birds on the Wakatobi Islands. We will mainly focus on Wangi-Wangi Island, because this is the home to the Wangi-Wangi white-eye, which I introduced you to earlier, and the Wakatobi cockatoo, a subspecies of the critically endangered yellow-crested cockatoo, Kakatua sulfurea Paul Andrew. So what we did was conducting a survey, preliminary survey, then another one, also getting in touch with local communities to see how the relationship to the birds is, how they see the wildlife around them, and then collect data on, no, that wasn't what I meant. And then also collect data on the birds in the wild. This is a video, I hope you can all see it, of Wangi-Wangi white-eyes preening their feathers in the wild. Isn't that amazing? Such a rare species, and this amazing footage taken by our biologist Febri. Yeah, this is one of a kind, basically. So what we did is mapping, monitoring the birds in the wild. We recorded the Wangi-Wangi white-eye on multiple occasions, and we also recorded the cockatoo on multiple occasions. And in the future, we will develop conservation strategies together with the national park as a joint project. That is what we want to develop in the future more and more for more different species. Similar thing we did on Maratua Island. So far, this is in an earlier stage. We did a preliminary survey in order to determine whether the Maratua Shama actually survives in the wild or not. Because as I told you before, since Berner et al. In 2015, we had to assume that the Maratua Shama was actually extinct in the wild, basically poached to extinction. Again, Febri went there, took amazing footage of other birds. This is the Maratua bulbul, a subspecies of the black-headed bulbul, which might well also warrant species status. And unfortunately did never see a Shama, but at least he heard them. And then we received this video from one of the hunters. He's actually a bird poacher, but we got in touch with him. We trying to negotiate with him and hopefully reach an agreement that he will stop bird poaching. And he sent us this video here. You see a bird in a trap. This is a decoy bird. And above, you can see a wild Maratua Shama. So this is the first record of a wild Maratua Shama since 2015, and actually proved that this bird still exists. We all feared it was extinct, but now we know it is not. So it is definitely worth to put all our efforts into conservation of these very last birds. And even if, hopefully not, but even if it might be too late and we might not be able to preserve these last individuals, we still need to preserve the habitat so that in the future we are able to reintroduce the Maratua Shamas that we have here at PCBA. I hope that was clear. So the thing is, even if we can't preserve the species in the wild, we at least have these ex-situ species, this ex-situ specimen here in Prigen. And that is what this link between ex-situ and in-situ actually means. These birds here are safe, and they could return to the wild once it is safe on Maratua Island. And that is what we are working towards, both in-situ and ex-situ. In the future, we have more species groups that we want to work with. Not yet in Prigen and not yet in situ, but rainbow fish are a species group in grave danger. Many Sulawesi freshwater endemics like shrimps, snails, also fish are in grave danger. And the Bawean warty pig endemic to Pulau Bawean in Jawa Timur is certainly under immense pressure. And imagine the African swine fever reaches the island, the species might well go extinct within weeks. So that is something we want to work with and hopefully can during the course of this year. As a conclusion, if one institution can keep a population of 200 critically endangered rainbow fish in an enclosure of 3 cubic meters, then shouldn't every aquatic collection, in this case in Europe, be getting involved? The cost of managing this entire population would be a fraction of what it takes to keep one tiger alive for a year. Isn't that true? We are working with all these overlooked, small, kind of less charismatic species, but it could be so easy to preserve them. It could be so easy to preserve them ex-situ, and we could potentially also preserve them in situ. Why don't we get involved? Don't we have the obligation to get moving, to start working with these species? I think we do, and I'm very glad that here in Prigen we actually can. These are 3 Maratua Shama eggs, 2 chicks, and a wonderful male, a species that would most certainly go extinct if we don't preserve it ex-situ and in situ. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jochen, for your very
you.
interesting presentation. Well, before we move to questions from participants, Jochen, I have some question to you. So, of course, the ultimate goal of the PCBA is to reintroduce the native endangered species back into the wild. When some animals were introduced to the wild, of course, we hope those individual animals can survive on their own. However, in the facility, it is human who take care of all the animals. So what is your strategy to avoid the animals to get attached to human? And also, do you think it is easy for the keepers not to get attached to the animal they release?
That is a certain skill that our keepers need to bring. So each reintroduction has to be approached individually. Every species is different, every individual is different. So you have to think about it very individually. For example, if you would reintroduce shamas, that would be a completely different strategy than it would be for starlings, because it's not a highly social species. On the other hand, for all the species we want to reintroduce, obviously we focus on parent rearing. So the parents are allowed to rear their own chicks, their own offspring. That will allow them to develop natural behavior and therefore be more able to survive in the wild. But of course, you have to prepare the birds. So before we would release them, we would move them to habituation aviary that gets them accustomed to the area and to the surroundings. And that will hopefully enable them to actually survive in the wild. But yeah, again, you have to approach each species individually.
How about the keepers? So do your keepers...
I think the way we manage, especially our birds, it is very hard to actually get attached to them because they're not tame. We try to preserve not only the species and its genetics, for example, but also its behavior. So the birds that we keep here have no close relationship to humans. We actually keep them as wild as possible. So, and then you have to keep in mind, each keeper takes care of dozens of birds. So the individual relationship is mostly limited to observation from outside the aviary and not direct interaction with the individual. And that might make it much easier to actually let go of them. And of course, we all know we are a team, we work towards the goal of reintroducing these birds. So all of us are happy that the starlings are now out in the open and flying around, and we know about the risks, but we also enjoy seeing them.
Well, we have some questions at the chat. I think the first question is from Bandang. I will read the question for you. Dear Jochen, that is interesting to put concern in genetic purity in breeding program of Javanese starling. I was thinking how you manage the parental stock of each species, especially to maintain the genetic diversity among them, and what kind of genetic test perform? How do you choose the male and female individual as parental after multiple generation of offspring, especially if the stocks don't come from the wild?
Yeah, that is an interesting question and certainly a challenge. Unfortunately, we have no real access to genetical testing when it comes to parental stock, for example. So what we do here, before we would introduce any species, we would need to breed several generations. With the Javanese starling, for example, it went all the way to F3. So that means 3 generations that were completely hatched here. Not only the parents, but the grandparents and the great-grandparents hatched here. And that gives us a good insight into their genetics. If there's no mutation showing up, no signs of hybridization within all the way to F3, then we can be fairly certain that there's nothing within the line, in the bloodline. When it comes to genetic diversity, good bookkeeping is the key to success. There's no way around. You're right, when the birds don't come from the wild, you know a little less about their pedigree. You cannot assume that they are unrelated. But on the other hand, if you source birds from different breeding facilities, potentially from different regions in Java, for example, then you can assume that they are fairly unrelated at least. And then, of course, it is important that through the generations, you keep a very good stud book, you keep all the records straight, so you can make sure to only pair unrelated birds with each other. That is applying to the species that you can do that. For some species like the Maratua Shama, for example, where there's no additional founder to be sourced, in the future, we cannot avoid inbreeding completely, like 100%. So we have to do our best to maintain the genetic diversity, to maintain the viability of the population as much as we can. We have to introduce all the founders that we have into the program and then work with as many offsprings as possible. But not for all species, no inbreeding is possible. We only can limit it as much as we
can. Jochen, you mentioned that we need to keep a good stud book. Maybe not all participants here have some background in ex-situ conservation. So maybe can you explain what is a stud book?
Yeah, basically, you can have internal stud books, external stud books, regional stud books. It always depends on what program you're working on. But what we do here internally, first and foremost, we have a detailed database of all the data of each and every individual, so that we can follow the family tree basically of each and every bird. For all the 400 individuals that we have here, we have the entire background information. We know all the history. Nothing is unknown. We know when it hatched, to which parents it hatched, where the parents came from, and so far and so on. And that is very important, so that I can, in the end, if I want to make a new pair, look into my database and see, no, these share the same grandparents, they better don't get paired off, for example.
Jadi mungkin kalau dalam bahasa Indonesia, stud book ini adalah buku silsilah keturunan mungkin ya. Okay, the next question, this is from Ahmad Naufal. So the increase in social media exposure from influencers regarding legal keeping of wild animals in the context of education seems to encourage people to take part in caring for wild animals. So what is the strategy of the Ex-situ in-situ link conservation institution to provide education to the community without creating such encouragement?
That is a very difficult one. I'm a bird guy. I'm an ex-situ conservation practitioner. That takes some social studies here. No, seriously, this is a very difficult but very, very important challenge. I totally agree. The growing social media hype that we have around pets in the broadest sense is a problem. Certainly, we see that for many species, and we see these trends that get triggered by influencers, and this is a big problem. And we as Lembaga Konservasi have to become stronger to actually educate the community into that direction. I totally agree, but we're not there yet. I hope that webinars like this actually work into that direction to clarify what is ex-situ conservation. And kalau pelihara musang di dalam kandang kecil itu bukan ex-situ konservasi ex-situ, itu pelihara musang. That's a difference. Only because it's ex-situ, it doesn't make it conservation. And this is something many people don't understand yet. So yeah, we have to become more active into that direction.
Yeah, I think that is quite problematic issues in Indonesia, because many influencers, they claim to do conservation by keeping endangered species on their own. And then, well, unfortunately, influencer is more popular than the real people who do conservation. So many people believe them. It is good that at Taman Safari you have the education department. I was part of that department before. Definitely, people will, well, when they come to Taman Safari, they will see many animals. Probably they will want to keep the animal. But I think it is the job of any education department in any ex-situ conservation to give the education to the visitors. Probably it's also good if we can expand the education not only to the visitors but also to the public in general, that the purpose of keeping the animals at the ex-situ facility is not to encourage people. These are actually unlucky individuals that we help.
Right, and just look at what facilities we provide for them. If you see what facilities here in Taman Safari, may it be PCBA behind the scenes or on display, we provide for our parrots. These are large aviaries where the birds can live a normal life. They can display their normal behavior. That is completely different to Kakatua Raja kept on a rantai on the porch. That bird cannot display any natural behavior. It can never reproduce. And that's a big difference. And that's why LK, Lembaga Konservasi, has a permit to do that, because we have the facilities and the expertise, while many private owners don't have expertise, knowledge, and permit, actually.
Yeah,
but
so probably,
on the other hand, I'm not
probably they
advocating
kept it illegally.
Yeah, often enough. But on the other hand, I'm not advocating against private ownership of animals. If people know what they're doing and they get the proper permit, then of course go ahead. If it's done right, there's nothing wrong with private ownership of animals. Just choose the right species and accommodate them properly. Then please keep your pets.
Okay, thank you. We have the next question from Mas Asman. So Mas Asman asks, well, you released Jalak Suren at Taman Safari area. What are your strategies to anticipate the rehunting of the released Jalak Suren? If the location is within PCBA or within the Taman Safari area, it might be safe from poaching. what if the birds leave Taman Safari area and expand its home range? Well, I'm sure many people, when they see jalak suren in the wild near their garden, for example, it's very tempting for them to, well, this is a very expensive bird. So what are your strategies?
So before we even thought about releasing starlings here at Taman Safari, we of course met with all the Kepala Desa around Taman Safari, and we also met with the whole community of all the villages to socialize what we're doing, to introduce our project, to make sure that everyone understands what we're doing. After that, we also went into the schools to educate the children about conservation of birds and all wildlife in general, because that's where you start. If the children want to preserve the birds, then parents can't really coach. That's at least our hope. We also put up signs in all the villages to educate people about the species that we have here and to make sure that they don't poach them. At the same time, we also have to be realistic. Once the birds start expanding their home range beyond the boundaries of Taman Safari, we will lose some. That's inevitable. They might be caught, they might have accidents. That's true. We have to create a stable population within Taman Safari first, and then these birds will expand. And hopefully, and I'm pretty optimistic about that, our neighboring communities will then join our efforts to preserve these birds. For example, we can look at the example of the Jalakuti in Taman Safari Bogor. This project started in 2017 with the release of 40 individuals. Nowadays, this is far more. The number has at least doubled. And the starlings have actually expanded in the villages around Taman Safari, and they are kept safe there. They're nesting in the villages, and they're not being poached, because the local communities understood that this is their local heritage, their local pride, and it only exists there. So they protect it alongside Taman Safari. And that's what we are hoping to achieve here as well.
I think that's a lot of work before you finally be able to release the bird. So how long did it take before you release the bird in November to educate the people?
25 years. You could say Taman Safari has always worked towards conservation of species, and Taman Safari has always had an education outreach program for school children, for example. So since the establishment of Taman Safari Jogja 25 years ago, we have worked into that direction. Of course, the last few months before the release, it was intensified, and we visited everyone, and we were more vocal, also specifically for the species. But in general, this works for many years already. This is a continuous program that is run by Taman Safari very routinely.
Okay, we have the next question from Nadiva. She wants to know more about the parrots. Can you tell more about parrots and the obstacle on maintaining them? I assume she's asking about captive husbandry.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, parrots bring their whole own set of challenges. Many of the species are highly intelligent, so it's not easy to pair them, for example. Other species are food specialists, like lories, that require special diet. So again, you have to look at each individual species. But in general, you have to try to work with every species in particular. So if you care for cockatoos, you need to think about what species of cockatoo you're caring for. The diet, for example, for Kakatua alba, the white cockatoo, can be different to Kakatua sulfurea. So you need to analyze the needs of each individual species and then adjust your husbandry to it. But in general, The social system of parrots is a little bit more complicated than for many other species. And often, and a real problem that we face in ex-situ conservation of parrots is that we receive this imprinted, confiscated parrots. So they came from private ownership. They were raised as a chick, and they're completely tame. They've never learned to interact with other parrots. This is especially detrimental with cockatoos, for example. And this is something that is very, very hard to mitigate. So you need to work for years with these birds to actually socialize them to other birds. Now that is a real challenge. What makes parrot keeping much easier is when you keep them busy. Always give them enrichment, provide them with branches, leaves, cardboard boxes, whatever you have, just keep them busy, let them work. So they're not bored and start plucking their feathers and stuff like that. You need to keep them working. There's a very intelligent birds. In the wild, they're constantly busy, either with their group or looking for food, looking for a partner. They're always busy. So you need to keep them busy in your care as well. That's crucial.
Another question from Tojiro. What would be the minimal distance between non-carnivorous and carnivorous facilities?
Yeah, that is an interesting one, and it depends a little bit on your local conditions and the species you want to keep. For example, if you want to keep big cats like a leopard next to your giant flying squirrel, for example, I would say take a few hundred meters in between at least. It always depends a little bit on usual wind direction. So is the smell blown towards the non-carnivorous animal or away from it? Then what vegetation do you have in between these two facilities? Is it really completely blocked or is it open landscape? So it depends a little bit. But the further away, the better. Obviously, smell can travel quite far, and these animals smell far better than we do. So I'm pretty sure this poor pangolin that has to live 60 meters away from whatever, a golden cat, is under stress because it can smell the golden cat even if I might not be able to. So the further the better.
Another question from Adi Prasetyo. What about FMD vaccination in wildlife ruminant and the other susceptible animal? Do you have any program about vaccination?
Not yet. This is something we might need to address in the future. Luckily, I can rely on our Taman Safari vet team because I myself am not a vet, so I follow recommendations from our vet team here because obviously they are wildlife specialists and they know what to do. But foot and mouth disease is a huge issue for us, and we are very worried that our pigs might be affected, for example, but we do our best for biosecurity. So for example, if keepers keep cattle at home, then they're not allowed to work with our pigs. We need to keep that separate. Also, the pig facility is double fenced so that they cannot get in touch with wild pigs, for example, even if there would be any in the vicinity. Shoes are changed before you enter the facility and so on. So we do our best to keep our animals safe. For vaccination, yeah, not yet.
Okay, this is another interesting question from Billy. Thank you, Jochen, for sharing PCBA works. It was awesome to hear about your conservation breeding program. I once had an argument with an organization that promotes breeding program, but refused to release the animals back to the wild, because in the wild, the animals will be hunted and the habitat kept disturbed. Do you ever have faced similar things? What do you think about it? What PCBA had due to it? And does PCBA also doing the works with preparing the released habitat and awareness?
Yes, so this is, if you say, yeah, we can't release because the habitat is not safe and the birds will be poached. then that's very short-sighted. That might be true in the moment, and that's what we just discussed with the Maratua shama. It's true, the habitat is still being disturbed, the birds are still being poached, but that's why we start working there. That's why we send people to Maratua. We start talking to all the stakeholders on the island, and hopefully by the end of the year we will have a ranger program on the island, and we will start actually preventing poaching from happening. So of course it's easy to say, oh, we can't release because it's not safe, so we keep all our animals here. Yeah, but where does that lead us? We need to start working on in-situ, ex-situ link. That's the whole point. And if we don't want to do that, yeah, then ex-situ is a one-way road. Then animals that are in ex-situ facilities will always be there. But if we start linking it, then we will find solutions to actually prepare sites to release. And of course, PCBA, as part of Taman Safari and especially the Kasi Foundation, Yayasan Konservasi Alam dan Satwa Indonesia, which was established by Taman Safari, but is an independent yayasan. We are working on these in-situ projects, and of course, these projects in the future ideally lead to the reintroduction of certain species. So yeah, we are working on the preparation of that.
Do you also work on preparing the habitat for release? So probably habitat rehabilitation or habitat improvement for some species to be released?
Not yet. We have not yet encountered that problem. But for example, the cockatoo on the Wakatobi Islands might be a species that requires some modifications to the habitat. The habitat is still good, but they might not find enough nesting holes, for example. Cockatoo is a large bird. They need a large tree with a large hole to be able to actually lay eggs. So what we might do in the future is to set up nest boxes for these birds. So this is something we want to do, yeah. But this always depends on the habitat that we have, the needs of the species. So this is a long process to actually get to the conclusion, yes, we need to do something in terms of habitat restoration. First, we need to understand what the species actually needs and what we actually have. And then we need to think about further steps. We always have to keep in mind PCBA and Yayasan Kasi are fairly young. We have just started with all that. For example, the Wangi Wangi project was the first in-situ project ever for us, managed by us. And this is only since mid last year. So we're pretty new to that. But we are very keen on doing more, doing it soon.
Yeah, hopefully it will be future project of PCBA to restore habitats of many wildlife anywhere in Indonesia. So another question from Nadiva. Now I understand why this person asked about the cockatoo. So let me read that for you. Thank you, sir, for the explanation. And for the cockatoo itself, how you prevent them from destructing the aviaries? We here at Akita Jawa Lolobata National Park, I assume, have a pretty big aviaries with many native trees inside. But when we place cockatoos inside, they keep destroying the facilities.
Yeah, that's why cockatoos make very bad pets. It's impossible to prevent them from doing that. This is their nature. It is part of their natural behavior, and actually,
I think there's a problem with the connection, right?
Yeah, it seems there is a connection problem with Jochen.
Yeah.
Jochen, can you hear me? Are you okay?
yes, I can hear you. Who knows what happened?
Yeah, you and Adia also disappeared
Yeah.
Oh no, Adia was still there.
Adja,
Okay,
Adja's
so
back now. We both disappeared because most likely power cut.
Yeah.
So I think we lost you while you explaining about the
It
cockatoo
was just, yeah, it was just impossible
behavior.
to prevent
Yeah,
the destructive behavior of the parrots.
actually we encourage them. That's what I meant with keep them busy. I always let them destroy stuff.
I think it probably it's similar with having dogs. If you don't give them enough enrichment, they will destroy many things.
Yeah,
I think it's similar with cats as well.
or small children.
Yeah, just like children, you need to keep children busy.
Yeah,
I don't know. I don't have children.
yeah, me neither. I'm just saying.
Yeah. Have you, by the way, I'm also curious while we were talking about parrots here, because WRC also had an experience of keeping these species too. Have you ever found the impact of their destroying anything in the cage? I mean, if some of the cage made of the metal, right, it may cause some problems when they bite it, and probably it is the lead made metal. Have you ever found such problems?
No, we have not had these kind of problems. We have also paid a lot of attention to choose materials that are parrot safe. So yeah, we haven't had this problem.
Okay, we have, I think this is the last question from the chat room, unless there are other questions. This is from Afifa. Dear Jochen, thank you for your presentation. How do you manage the health screen check for animals under treatment at PCBA from their admittance until being released? What are the health screening tests and how often medical checkup conducted? Is animal conditioning treatment in order to enable health check issue possible in the facility like PCBA? This is interesting, the conditioning. I know in Taman Safari, they do conditioning treatment, but how about the PCBA? You can explain more about that.
So the health checks are done by the vet team. It depends on the species and it depends on the need. So in preparation for the release, for example, we did fecal samples and stuff like that to make sure that we release healthy birds. And then you have to keep in mind the birds that we released, they all hatched here. So this was not birds that got into the facility, stayed for a while, and then were released. All 40 birds that we released in November were bred here at PCBA. Not a single bird came from outside. So we know all the medical history of these birds. So we can fairly well know what birds we are releasing here. As to conditioning training, yeah, we have started, especially with our mammals, of course. We do this habituation training, for example, for the musang. I can check all of them every evening. They're nocturnal, so you have to come in at night. They're pretty tame, or at least calm, so I can check them. I can check the condition. Same for the pigs. For the birds, it's a bit different. And this is first of all, we don't want to disturb them, so we don't want to interfere too much into their natural behavior. That training would be that interference. And then we have so many birds. Who does that training? It would take an army of keepers to train them. That's not really possible. But for the mammals, yes, we work on conditioning training.
And how is the biosecurity program conducted at PCBA?
Shoes have to be changed, and then keepers are assigned to certain units. So the transmission from unit to unit is limited because one keeper who works with bird A does not enter the facilities of bird B. Plus, shoes are constantly changed. We all wear uniform that doesn't leave the park. So yeah, it's basic biosecurity.
Okay. No more question on the
It's
chat.
finished.
Irna, I think you have some questions.
Well, my question is just very, very basic question. You mentioned before that especially for every species, you have the reason on why you would do to their breeding. I was just curious, how's the process to choose what species do you want to breed at the beginning? Like you said before, you choose the chiefs. It's just like why would the chiefs and so that's for the other species. I mean, would you like to tell us a story on how at the beginning you choose what kind of project you want to choose, what kind of species?
Yeah, that's a very good question, because it comes with a whole new set of challenges. Of course, one guideline is the IUCN Red List. If a species is endangered or critically endangered, it might be worth putting ex-situ efforts into it. But then there is the civet, for example, which is least concern or near threatened if you check IUCN Red List. So why would we work with that? Because we are working with this Javanese subspecies, which is very distinct. It looks completely different. It is endemic to Java, and it is traded in large numbers. So, yeah, but who determines that? Huh? So we all know taxonomically it is distinct. It is a subspecies. That's the baseline. We also know it is endemic to Java. So it has a fairly small distribution. Then I've, during monitoring the trade, collected data on trade quantity. I can tell that there's quite a lot in the trade. I forwarded this data to experts, basically to the small carnivore specialist group and to people who actually know about conservation of small carnivores. And then together we discussed if this is a species that we might need to look into. And that's how we made the decision to actually do it. So never it is me deciding to do something, but it's always in a group. It is always with experts. For the songbirds, for example, it is the Asian Songbird Trade Specialist Group by IUCN. This is an international committee of experts that can provide a guideline, provide priorities. And that's how we determine with what species to work. But it is not always easy, because for many species, field data are lacking. So it is basically a little bit guessing. You know that the distribution is very small. There's very few records from the wild, but there's a lot of records from the trade. Then you can already tell, okay, the species is under pressure. So then you look at, is the habitat relatively safe? Is this a species that can generally survive in disturbed and locked forest, for example? Or is it a lowland rainforest specialist that needs riverine forest? Yeah, then if it's a habitat specialist that is rarely recorded, but often in the trade, yeah, then it's maybe something you have to look into. If it is rarely recorded, sometimes in the trade, but the habitat generalist, yeah, then maybe it's just under-recorded, and you don't have to look into it. So it is difficult. It is a very difficult process, and there's nothing I can do alone. This is something we do with a lot of other people in order to reach educated decisions.
Yeah, it's just interesting to me. Like, from what I've heard from your explanation, you also consider a place or a location, right, where you work. Especially you work in Java, so you consider a lot of like looking what kind of Javan species that's been on the risk, right?
Yeah, I mean, and our focus is not really only on Java; it's on whole Indonesia. So yeah, it is a long and difficult process, and a lot of it comes down to personal knowledge, personal decisions in the end, and not necessarily my personal decision. Of course, I ask questions and I supply data, but in the end, we always rely on expert opinions.
Yeah, right. Interesting. Thank you, Jochen.
Very welcome.